everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll see how to complete this challenge lab, build Google Cloud infrastructure for Azure Professionals. So this is a 1 hour challenge lab. So before starting the lab, let's go through the challenge scenario. So in this challenge scenario, as a cloud engineer who is familiar with Azure in Symbol Group and recently trained with Google Cloud and Kubernetes, you have been asked to help a new team set up their environment. The team has asked for your help and has done some work but needs you to complete the work. You are expected to have the skills and knowledge for this task. So in this challenge lab, we'll be creating a development VPC with 3 subnets manually. Then we'll create a production VPC with 3 subnets, create a Bastion host that is connected to both VPC, create a development cloud SQL instance and connect and prepare the WordPress environment, create a Kubernetes cluster in the development VPC for WordPress, prepare the Kubernetes cluster for the WordPress environment, create a WordPress deployment using the supplied configuration. Then finally we will enable monitoring of the cluster via Stackdriver and then provide access for an additional engineer. So these are all the tasks which we will be performing in this challenge lab. So let's start the lab. So now we have logged into Google Cloud Console. So let's go back. So you have to ensure that you follow these standards. So here we need to create all the resources in US East 1 region and US East 1 D zone. And we need to use the project VPCs and the naming should be this. So whatever naming they have mentioned in this lab, you have to ensure you follow that. And we have to use the cost effective resource sizes. So in this challenge lab, we have a development team and they want to use WordPress and we need to set up a development environment for that. So this is an infrastructure diagram and we need to set up this accordingly. So let's proceed with task 1. Create development VPC manually. Create the first VPC called Graphene Dev VPC in US East 1 region with the following subnets only. So we need to create a development VPC with 2 subnets. So they have mentioned these subnets and what IP address needs to be used for these subnets. So let's create this VPC. Activate Cloud Shell. Open this in a window. Before creating the VPC, let's export some variables here. So we'll export the project ID, zone, region, and then we'll be setting the zone. So this project ID you can get it from the lab. Here you find these details, project ID and the region and the zone, you will get it here. So you have to ensure that you set these variables. So let's copy this. So now it's updated. Next we'll be creating the VPC. So for that we need to execute this command gcloud compute networks create. Since this is a VPC network, we need to pass this network flag here. And this is the VPC name. So we are creating Griffin Dev VPC and the project ID you need to pass because inside this project only we can create the resource. Then under subnet mode, we need to pass this flag customs. Since we are creating a 2 custom subnets, we have to use this custom flag and then here we need to execute gcloud compute network subnets create. So this is the first subnet name. Here you need to pass a project ID and the region again, and the subnet IP address range is this. So they have mentioned here. So this is the subnet IP address range which they have mentioned. So you need to use that. And under network, that VPC network name you need to provide. And then again we are creating the second subnet here. And it follows the same approach. We need to pass the VPC network in which we are creating this subnet and the IP address range for this second subnet. So let's copy this, execute it here. Now this is created, so you should get this output once the VPC network and the subnets are created. So you can go back here. Here you need to go to VPC network, click on VPC network. So here you see there are 2 networks here, one is the default one, another is the Griffin Dev VPC. So this is the VPC network which we created just now. So if we go inside this, you can find the VPC network details here, and if you click on subnets, you can find 2 subnets. So we have created these 2 subnets. So these details you can find it here. So once this is done, you can click on check my progress. And this is complete now. Let's proceed with task 2. Create production VPC manually. Create the second VPC called Griffin Prod VPC in US East 1 region with the following subnets only. So here also they have given 2 subnets. We have to create 2 subnets inside this VPC network with this IP address range. So for that as well. So you can go back here and you can just copy this command. So the approach is the same. How we created the development VPC, we will be creating the production VPC also in a similar way. So let's execute it here. So here only the VPC name will change, VPC name and the subnets. So that will be different. And also the IP address range. So now this is created. So if we go back here. So under VPC network. So now you can see this second VPC is created. So this is the second VPC. This is a prod VPC. And inside that you can find these 2 subnets got created. So let's go back. You can click on check my progress. So now this is complete. Now let's proceed with task 3. Create Bastion host. Create a Bastion host with 2 network interfaces, one connected to Griffin Dev MGMT and the other connected to Griffin Prod MGMT in US East 1D zone. Make sure you can SSH to the host. So now we are creating a Bastion host which will connect to one dev subnet and another to prod subnet. So for that we will be executing this command gcloud compute instance create and the Bastion. Bastion is the name of for this host and the project ID we need to pass and the zone. And under network interface we will be passing this network Griffin Dev VPC. So this is the Dev VPC network name and then we'll pass this subnet. So this we have to since the Bastion host has to connect to this subnet, we need to specify that, and this subnet is inside this VPC network. So you have to specify this way, and then again this Bastion host has to connect to prod MGMT. So to this subnet it has to connect. So for that we need to specify the network interface, second network interface, that is Griffin Prod VPC and then the subnet, and then we are creating a firewall rule with this name, and the target tags will be SSH allow TCP port 22. So here we are specifying the port and protocol and the network name, and the source IP address range it will be 0.0.0, which means it allows all IP address range, and compute firewall. So again we are creating one more firewall rule for prod, and then we are specifying the target tags and TCP port and protocol we are specifying, and the network. So for both dev and prod we need to specify it. So let's copy this. So now you can see it has created this Bastion host in this zone and machine type is N1 standard. So next it has created the firewall rule. It has created 2 firewall rule, one for dev and one for prod. You can find the details of this firewall rule here. So here we can go back here, can go to compute engine. So this is the one Bastion host. So here you can see it is having 2 internal IP and 2 external IP. And if we click in, say under network interface you can find these details. So we have added this network interface VPC, dev VPC and prod VPC here. So from Bastion host we will be able to connect to this subnet. So now we can click on check my progress. Now this is complete. Now let's proceed with task 4. Create and configure Cloud SQL instance. Create a MySQL Cloud SQL instance called Griffin Dev DB in US East 1 region. Connect to the instance and run the following SQL commands to prepare the WordPress environment. So first let's create the SQL instance. For that we need to execute this command gcloud SQL instance create. This is a SQL instance name and the project ID we need to pass, and the region and database version we need to pass, root password. So this is important to connect to the SQL instance. So let's copy this, execute it here. So now this is created. Now let's create the database. So for that we need to execute this command gcloud SQL database create, and this is a database name. So here this will be WordPress. So WordPress is a database name and the instance is this Griffin Dev DB. So this is a SQL instance. So inside this instance we are creating this DB, and the project ID we need to pass. So let's copy this, execute it here. Now this is created. Next we need to create a user to connect to this instance. So let's copy this command. So now we have created the user. So let's go back here. You can click on check my progress. So now this is complete. Now let's proceed with task 5, create Kubernetes cluster. So next we need to create a Kubernetes cluster in this subnet. So for that you can execute this command gcloud container clusters create. This is the cluster name and the project ID, zone, machine type should be E2 standard 4, and in which network we are creating this. It's in the dev network. It's a dev VPC network and the sub network is this. This is very important, and then number of nodes will be 2. Then we are generating the kubeconfig entry. So by executing this command. So let's copy this, execute it here. So now this has created a cluster and it has generated the kubeconfig entry as well. So if you want to verify, you can go to Google Cloud Console here. Navigation menu, you can click on Kubernetes engine. So here you can see we have created this cluster. So now you can click on check my progress. This is complete now. In task 6, we need to prepare the Kubernetes cluster. Use Cloud Shell and copy all files from this. And the WordPress server needs to access the MySQL database using the username and password. So let's copy this. So when you do ls, so we have this. We have copied this deployment files. Next, the WordPress server needs to access the MySQL database using the username and password you created in task 4. You did this by setting the values as secrets. WordPress also needs to store its working files outside the container. So you need to create a volume. Navigate to the directory where the files are copied and add the following secrets and volume to the cluster using wp environment.yaml. So to this YAML file we need to add. Make sure you configure the username to wp user and password to this before creating the configuration. You also need to provide a key for service account that was already set up. This service account provides access to the database for a sidecar container. Use the command below to create the key and then add the key to the Kubernetes environment. So I have already updated this YAML file. So this YAML file it contains this configuration. So the kind is persistent volume claim. So the name will be WordPress volume claim. So here we have configured it, and here we have set the username and the password. So let's copy this. Can execute it here. So once this is done, we need to create this deployment. So let's copy this. Now the volume claim is created. So next we can copy this and execute it here. So once done, you can go back here and click on check my progress. Once that is done, let's proceed with task 7. Create a WordPress deployment. Now that you have provisioned the MySQL database and set up the secrets and volume, you can create the deployment using wp deployment.yaml. Before you create the deployment, you need to edit this YAML file. Replace your SQL instance with Griffin DB's instance connection name. Get the instance connection name from your Cloud SQL instance Griffin DB details page. Create your WordPress deployment and the service. Once the load balancer is created, you can visit the site and ensure you see the WordPress site installer. At this point, the dev team will take over and complete the install, and you move on to the next task. So these are the activities which we need to perform in this task 7. So let's set the instance ID by executing this command. So this is the WordPress deployment.yaml file. So this contains the configuration which is required to create. So I have updated this YAML file. So you can just copy this, execute it here. So once done, you need to execute this kubectl create deployment. So we are creating deployment and the service. So we need to execute both of these commands. Now it is created. You can execute this command kubectl get deployments. So you see this is running. Next kubectl get service. So external IP is still pending. So once that is available, we can access that. So now we have the external IP. So let's copy that in a new browser. So you should get this output. So once done, you can click on check my progress. Now let's proceed with task 8, enable monitoring. Create an uptime check for your WordPress development site. Run the command kubectl gets svc in the cloud shell for WordPress endpoint IP address and replace it while creating the uptime check and leave other values as default. So for that, so we need to use the external IP. So you can get the external IP by running this command kubectl get svc. So here I am running kubectl get service WordPress. So it will fetch the external IP address and it will export to this variable. So let's copy this. Post that we will be exporting these variables into this tfvar file. So let's copy this. So when we cat this file, so here you can see this project ID and the external IP address. Next, by executing this, we are setting the uptime monitoring check. Under resource block, we are setting this monitoring uptime check. These are the configuration. Under monitored resource, here we are passing this project ID and host details. So let's copy this. So once that is done, we need to execute this command terraform init terraform apply to apply the changes. So now this is complete. You can click on check my progress. Once that is done, let's proceed with task 9. Provide access for an additional engineer. You have an additional engineer starting and you want to ensure they have access to the project. So please go ahead and grant them the editor role to the project. So this is the second user ID. So for this user, we will be granting the editor role on the project. So for that, so let's copy this. Post that for that user we'll be setting this. So we will be binding this role, editor role. So here I'm passing that. So let's copy this. So now this is complete. So we can go back here, click on check my progress. So let's wait for a few more seconds. So now this is complete. So we have completed all the tasks in this lab. You can click on end lab. If you face any issues completing any of this task in this lab, you can leave your comment under comment section. I will be happy to help. If you found my video helpful, please like and subscribe to my channel and stay up to date with the latest content on this channel. Thank you all for watching. See you in the next video.